Kevin Costner invited his humble employee to a luxurious reception, and she ended up feeling uncomfortable there, but he called her and... The crystal chandeliers illuminated the grand ballroom of Kevin Costner's Beverly Hills mansion, casting a golden glow over the crowd of Hollywood's elite. The air buzzed with excitement. Actors, directors, producers, all dressed in their finest attire celebrating Kevin's latest triumph. His new role in the billion-dollar blockbuster The Last Horizon had cemented his status as one of Hollywood's most enduring stars. At 59, Kevin Costner remained as charismatic and talented as ever, his smile still capable of lighting up a room. Behind the scenes, 28-year-old Madeline Carter moved quickly and efficiently, her eyes downcast as she arranged the silver trays of canapes. She had worked as a caterer for 3 years now, serving the rich and famous at their lavish parties without ever truly being seen by them. Tonight was no different, or so she thought. Madeline! Kevin's deep voice caught her by surprise. She nearly dropped the tray she was holding. "Mr. Costner," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She couldn't understand why he would address her directly. In all the events she had worked at his home, they had never exchanged more than a polite nod. "We're bringing you this incredible story that has touched thousands of hearts across the country. If you're enjoying it, please consider subscribing to our channel and sharing where you're watching from in the comments below. Your support means everything to us and helps us continue sharing these emotional journeys that connect us all. Now, back to this unforgettable moment between Kevin and Madeline. I've noticed you working my events for years now," Kevin said, his eyes kind but searching. "You're always so present. Everyone else blends into the background, but there's something about you that stands out." Madeline felt her cheeks flush. She wasn't used to being noticed, especially not by someone like Kevin Costner. "I'm just doing my job, sir." Kevin shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. "No, it's more than that. There's a story behind those eyes." He paused, then added something that would change the course of Madeline's life forever. "I'd like you to join my party tonight, as a guest, not staff." Madeline stared at him, certain she had misheard. I don't understand." "It's simple. Take the night off. Come as my guest." His eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the same smile that had charmed millions on screen. "Consider it a personal invitation." Across the room, Victoria Palmer, the event coordinator, watched the exchange with narrowed eyes. She approached them quickly, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor. "Kevin, darling, Senator Wilson has been asking for you," she interrupted, placing a manicured hand on his arm. Her gaze flickered dismissively over Madeline. "Tell him I'll be right there," Kevin replied, without taking his eyes off Madeline. "Think about it," he said to her quietly before Victoria led him away. Madeline stood frozen, her mind racing. Why would Kevin Costner, one of the most famous men in the world, invite her, a nobody, to his party? It made no sense. "What did Kevin Costner want with you?" asked Javier, another caterer who had become something of a friend over the years. "He invited me to join the party," Madeline replied, still dazed. Javier's eyebrows shot up. "As a guest? Girl, this is like Cinderella stuff. You have to go." "I can't. I don't belong here, Javier, not with these people." "That's exactly why you should go. When does someone like us get this chance?" His eyes lit up. "I have an idea. My sister left a dress at my place after a wedding last month. It's fancy, designer. Haven, she won't miss it for one more night." 2 hours later, Madeline stood at the entrance of Kevin Costner's mansion, no longer in her catering uniform, but wearing a midnight blue gown that hugged her slender frame. Her usually tied-back blonde hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders. She felt like an imposter. The security guard checked her name against the guest list, his expression betraying surprise when he found it. "Welcome, Ms. Carter," he said, stepping aside to let her pass. The mansion looked different from this perspective. No longer was she navigating it with trays of food. Now she was walking through it as if she belonged among the stars. The main ballroom was even more magnificent than before, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the twinkling lights of Los Angeles. Madeline felt eyes on her immediately. Curious, questioning, judging. She recognized many faces from magazines and movies, people whose dishes she had cleared, whose glasses she had refilled, always invisible until now. "Who is she?" she overheard a woman in a red dress whisper to her companion. "I don't know. New actress, maybe. Or someone's plus one." The man replied, not bothering to lower his voice. Madeline felt her confidence wavering. She accepted a glass of champagne from a server, someone she had worked alongside just hours ago, and tried to look as though she attended Hollywood parties every weekend. "You came." Kevin's voice came from behind her, warm and genuine. She turned to face him, conscious of how out of place she must look. "I'm not sure why I did," she admitted. "Because you were curious," he replied, his eyes twinkling. "And because sometimes we all need to step out of our comfortable shadows." Before she could respond, they were interrupted by a striking woman with fiery red hair and eyes as sharp as diamonds. Scarlett Whitmore, one of Hollywood's most powerful producers, and, as industry gossip had it, Kevin's ex-girlfriend. "Kevin, darling, you've been hiding from me all evening," Scarlett purred, kissing him on both cheeks before turning her calculating gaze to Madeline. "And who might this be?" Kevin placed his hand lightly on Madeline's back, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Scarlett. "This is Madeline Carter, a special guest of mine tonight. Madeline, meet Scarlett Whitmore." "Charmed," Scarlett said, her tone suggesting anything but. Her eyes scanned Madeline from head to toe, taking in the borrowed dress and simple makeup. "And what is it that you do, Madeline? Are you in the industry?" Madeline began, unsure how to respond. "Madeline has been observing us all for years," Kevin interjected. "She probably knows more about the real Hollywood than most of the people in this room." Scarlett's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. "How mysterious. Well, Kevin, when you're done with your social experiment, James Cameron is dying to discuss the sequel with you." With that, she glided away, leaving a cloud of expensive perfume in her wake. "I'm sorry about that," Kevin said quietly. "It's fine, she's right to be confused. I don't fit in here." Kevin's expression grew serious. "You know what I've learned after 30 years in this business? Most people here don't fit in either. They're just better at pretending." As the evening progressed, Madeline felt increasingly out of place. Everywhere she turned, she encountered curious stares or dismissive glances. She overheard snippets of conversations. "Apparently she's his catering staff. Can you believe it?" Kevin always had a thing for strays. Remember that time he brought his gardener to the Golden Globes after party? It's just for publicity. His new movie needs the man of the people angle. Each comment felt like a small dagger. Madeline retreated further into herself, regretting her decision to come. The grand ballroom, which had seemed so magical at first, now felt suffocating. The champagne that had tasted sweet turned sour in her mouth. She found herself wandering away from the crowd, seeking solace in the quieter parts of the mansion. A set of French doors led to a secluded balcony overlooking the city. Los Angeles sprawled below, a sea of twinkling lights that seemed to mirror the stars above. Madeline gripped the stone balustrade, taking deep breaths of the cool night air. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. This wasn't her world, and it never would be. She had been foolish to think, even for a moment, that she could belong here. "Found your escape route, I see." Kevin's voice startled her. Madeline quickly wiped at her eyes before turning. "I just needed some air." Kevin joined her at the balustrade, his presence both comforting and unsettling. Up close, without the barrier of their usual roles, she noticed the small wrinkles around his eyes, the silver threading through his hair, the genuine warmth in his gaze. "They're not very subtle, are they?" he said after a moment. "Who?" "All of them, with their whispers and stares." He sighed. "I thought Hollywood would have evolved by now, but some things never change." "Why did you invite me tonight, Mr. Costner?" Madeline asked directly, needing to understand. "Kevin, please," he corrected gently, "and I invited you because—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Because every time you've worked an event here, I've noticed something in your eyes. A sadness, yes, but also a strength. You see everything, understand everyone, but no one sees you. I wanted to change that, even if just for one night." His honesty took her breath away. I don't belong here, she whispered, echoing her earlier thoughts. Who says? Kevin challenged. He looked out at the city lights. You know, I grew up in Compton, not far from where some of those lights are shining. My dad was a ditch digger for Southern California Edison. When I first came to Hollywood, people like the ones at this party told me I didn't belong either. Madeline hadn't known this about him. The vulnerability in his admission made him suddenly more human than the screen icon she had admired from afar. If you're here, Kevin continued, his voice low and sincere, it's because I wanted you to be, and I never make mistakes about people. Soft music drifted out from the ballroom. Kevin turned to her, extending his hand. Would you dance with me, Madeline? She hesitated, thinking of all the eyes that would be on them if they returned to the party. Here? She asked. Right here, he confirmed. Under the stars, just us. Slowly, Madeline placed her hand in his. Kevin drew her close, one hand resting lightly on her waist as they began to sway to the distant melody. The city lights twinkled below them, and for a moment, the rest of the world faded away. Why do I feel like you're running from something? Kevin asked softly as they danced. Madeline tensed. We're all running from something, aren't we? Some more than others, he replied, his eyes searching hers. Whatever it is, Madeline, you don't have to face it alone. For a brief moment, Madeline allowed herself to believe him. In Kevin's arms, with the stars above and the city below, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. But peace, for Madeline Carter, had always been fleeting. Unbeknownst to them, Scarlett Whitmore watched from the shadows of the mansion. Her emerald eyes narrowed with jealousy and suspicion. In her hand, she clutched her phone, having just taken several photos of their intimate dance. Enjoy your fairy tale while it lasts, Cinderella, she whispered, her red lips curving into a cold smile, because I'm about to find out exactly who you really are. The morning after the party, Madeline woke to sunlight streaming through the thin curtains of her modest apartment in East Los Angeles. For a brief, disorienting moment, she wondered if the previous night had been a dream. Dancing under the stars with Kevin Costner, his hand warm on her waist, his eyes seeing her in a way no one had in years. But the borrowed midnight blue dress, hanging on her closet door, was proof enough. It hadn't been a dream. And that realization brought with it not just wonder, but fear. Madeline's phone buzzed on her nightstand. She reached for it, expecting to see Javier's name flashing on the screen, demanding details about the night. Instead, an unknown number appeared with a text message that made her blood run cold. I know who you really are, Madeline. Or should I call you Elizabeth Harwood? The phone slipped from Madeline's fingers, clattering to the floor. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a trapped bird. No one had called her by that name in 5 years. No one was supposed to know it anymore. Across town, in her penthouse overlooking the Pacific Ocean, Scarlett Whitmore sipped her morning coffee while scrolling through the information her private investigator had sent overnight. The file on Madeline Carter was thin but revealing. A changed name, a mysterious past in Connecticut, and connections to one of America's wealthiest families. Elizabeth Harwood, Scarlett murmured to herself, tasting the name. What are you running from, and why has Kevin taken such an interest in you? She closed the file and reached for her phone, sending a text message that would set in motion events she couldn't possibly foresee. At his Malibu beachfront property, Kevin Costner stood on the deck, watching waves crash against the shore as dawn broke over the horizon. He hadn't been able to sleep, his mind filled with thoughts of Madeline, her vulnerability, her strength, and the connection he'd felt when they danced together. He couldn't explain why he'd been drawn to her all these years. Perhaps it was her quiet dignity, so rare in the superficial world he inhabited. Or maybe it was recognition. He saw in her the same determination he'd had when he first arrived in Hollywood, an outsider with nothing but dreams and the will to make them real. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Victoria Palmer, his publicist. Have you seen TMZ this morning? She asked without preamble, her voice tight with concern. You know I don't read that garbage, Kevin replied, his tone hardening. Well, they're running a story about you and your mystery woman from last night. Someone leaked photos of you two, dancing on the balcony. The headlines are suggestive. Kevin closed his eyes, frustration washing over him. He knew immediately who was responsible. Scarlett. Probably, Victoria agreed. But that's not the point. The point is, people are talking, and they want to know who this woman is. Her name is Madeline Carter, and she works for the catering company I use for events, Kevin said firmly. There's nothing more to it than that. But even as he said the words, he knew they weren't entirely true. There was something more, something he couldn't yet define but couldn't deny either. Kevin, you know I support you, but getting involved with staff is never a good look, especially with the Oscars coming up and The Last Horizon in the running for Best Picture. I'm not getting involved with anyone, Kevin interrupted, and even if I were, my personal life is my business. After ending the call, Kevin stood, for a long moment watching the ocean. Then he made a decision. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for the catering company. It was time to see Madeline again, but on his terms, away from prying eyes and Hollywood gossip. Madeline spent the morning in a haze of anxiety, checking locks and pulling blinds closed. The text message had awakened old fears she thought she'd buried. She debated deleting it, blocking the number, but what good would that do? If someone had found her, they would find her again. When her phone rang with a call from her workplace, she nearly let it go to voicemail, but she needed this job, needed the anonymity it provided. Madeline, it's Thomas from Elite Catering, her boss's voice came through. I've got a private job request specifically for you. Kevin Costner's asking for you to cater a small dinner at his beach house tonight, just him and a few guests. Madeline's hand tightened around the phone. I don't think that's a good idea, Thomas. It's triple your usual rate, Thomas added. He was very insistent it be you. Madeline closed her eyes. She needed the money. Rent was due next week and her savings were dwindling. And despite her fears, she wanted to see Kevin again, to understand why he had singled her out from all the invisible workers who populated his world. All right, she finally agreed. What time? As evening approached, Madeline drove her aging Honda along the Pacific Coast Highway, the ocean stretching endlessly beside her. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the water in shades of gold and crimson. Any other day she would have found it beautiful, calming. Today it felt like a warning. Kevin's beach house was smaller than his Beverly Hills mansion, but no less impressive. A modern structure of glass and steel perched on the edge of a cliff overlooking a private strip of beach. As Madeline parked in the circular driveway, she noticed only one other car, Kevin's vintage Aston Martin. No other catering staff, no other guests. She checked her phone again, confirming the details Thomas had sent. Private dinner for Kevin Costner and guests, 7 p.m. But where were the guests? Before she could decide whether to stay or leave, Kevin appeared at the front door, dressed casually in jeans and a light blue shirt that matched his eyes. "Madeline," he said, his voice warm with genuine pleasure. "I'm glad you came." "Mr. Costner," she replied formally, trying to maintain the professional distance that had been shattered the night before. "I was told you requested catering for a dinner party." A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I may have exaggerated the size of the gathering. Okay, it's just us." Madeline felt her pulse quicken. "That's not appropriate. I should go." "Please don't," Kevin said quickly, his expression turning serious. "I needed to see you away from everyone else. After last night, with the photos leaked to the press." "Photos?" Madeline interrupted, her anxiety spiking. "What photos?" Kevin grimaced. "Someone took pictures of us dancing on the balcony. They're all over TMZ and other gossip sites. I wanted to warn you and apologize for any unwanted attention coming your way." Madeline's mind raced. Photos in the press meant exposure, visibility, the very things she'd been avoiding for 5 years. And then there was the text message from this morning. The timing couldn't be coincidental. "This was a mistake," she said quietly, turning back toward her car. "I can't do this." "Madeline, wait," Kevin called after her. When she didn't stop, he moved quickly to intercept her, gently taking her arm. "What are you afraid of? Who are you running from?" The directness of his question caught her off guard. She looked into his eyes, seeing nothing but concern and something else, a desire to understand, to help. "You wouldn't understand," she whispered. "Try me," he challenged, still holding her arm. "I've spent my life playing other people, Madeline. I know what it's like to wear a mask." For a moment she wavered. It had been so long since she'd told anyone the truth, so long since she'd trusted someone enough to share her real story. "Come inside," Kevin said softly. "No pressure, no expectations. Just dinner and conversation. If you want to leave after that, I'll drive you home myself." Against her better judgment, Madeline nodded. As Kevin led her into the house, neither of them noticed the black sedan parked down the road, its tinted windows concealing the photographer with the telephoto lens. Inside Kevin's beach house, floor-to-ceiling windows framed a spectacular view of the ocean. The interior was tastefully decorated but comfortable, lived in a way his Beverly Hills mansion wasn't. This, Madeline sensed, was his real home. "I hope you like seafood," Kevin said, leading her to the kitchen. "I thought I'd cook for you tonight." Madeline raised an eyebrow. "You cook?" "Don't sound so surprised," he laughed. "I grew up with a working mother who made sure all her kids knew their way around a kitchen." He opened the refrigerator and pulled out fresh fish, vegetables, and a bottle of white wine. "My specialty is grilled sea bass with lemon herb butter." "I'm supposed to be catering for you," Madeline pointed out, but a small smile had begun to form on her lips despite her anxiety. "Consider yourself off duty tonight," Kevin replied, handing her a glass of wine. "Unless you want to chop these vegetables." For the next hour they worked side by side in the kitchen. Madeline found herself relaxing as they fell into an easy rhythm. Kevin told stories about his childhood in Compton, his early struggles in Hollywood, and the lessons he'd learned along the way. He spoke without pretense or ego, just a man sharing his journey with someone who might understand. "Your turn," Kevin said as they sat down to eat at a small table overlooking the ocean. The sun had set, and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Tell me something about Madeline Carter." Madeline stared down at her plate, then took a deep breath. "Madeline Carter doesn't really exist," she admitted, her voice barely audible over the sound of the waves below. "I made her up 5 years ago when I left my old life behind." Kevin watched her carefully, his expression open and non-judgmental. "And who were you before?" "Elizabeth Harwood," she said, the name feeling strange on her lips after so long. "Daughter of Richard Harwood, CEO of Harwood Industries. We were Connecticut royalty. Old money, old power, old secrets." Kevin nodded, recognition flashing in his eyes. "Harwood? The tech conglomerate?" "Yes. My father built it from nothing, turned it into a billion-dollar company." Madeline, or Elizabeth, took a long sip of her wine before continuing. "I was raised to be the perfect heiress. The right schools, the right friends, the right fiancé." "Fiancé?" Kevin asked, something shifting in his expression. "James Whitaker, son of my father's business partner." She laughed bitterly. "The perfect merger, that's how my father saw our engagement." "What happened?" Kevin prompted gently when she fell silent. Madeline looked up, meeting his eyes directly for the first time that evening. "I discovered that my father and James were involved in something illegal. Embezzlement, stock manipulation, fraud. When I confronted them, threatened to expose them, James got violent." Kevin's hand tightened around his wine glass. "Did he hurt you?" "He tried," Madeline replied, her voice steadier now. "I fought back, managed to get away, but I knew they would never let me go, not with what I knew. So I ran, changed my name, my appearance, disappeared into a world where no one would think to look for Elizabeth Harwood. Here, serving the elite she used to be part of," Kevin said softly. "Ironic, isn't it?" Madeline gave him a sad smile. "I've spent 5 years being invisible, and then you saw me." Kevin reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "I'm glad I did." The moment hung between them, fragile and charged with possibility. Then Madeline's phone buzzed, breaking the spell. She reluctantly pulled her hand from Kevin's to check the message. Another text from the unknown number. "Enjoying your date with Costner. James says hello. He's been looking for you for a very long time, Elizabeth." The color drained from Madeline's face. She stood abruptly, knocking over her wine glass. Red liquid spread across the white tablecloth like blood. "I have to go," she said, her voice shaking. "They've found me. I'm not safe. You're not safe. With me around." Kevin stood too, alarmed by the fear in her eyes. "Who's found you, Madeline? Talk to me." "James, my ex-fiancé. If he knows I'm here." She looked wildly around the room, as if expecting shadows to materialize into threats. "You don't understand what he's capable of." Kevin moved around the table, placing his hands on her shoulders. "Then help me understand. Whatever it is, whatever you're facing, you don't have to face it alone." Madeline looked up at him, torn between the desire to trust and the instinct to run. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you risk getting involved in my mess?" Kevin's answer was simple but profound. "Because sometimes people come into our lives unexpectedly, and we just know they matter." Before Madeline could respond, the sharp sound of breaking glass shattered the moment. They both turned toward the source of the noise. One of the floor-to-ceiling windows now had a small, precise hole in its center, surrounded by a web of cracks. Kevin reacted instantly, pulling Madeline to the floor as another shot rang out, this one shattering a vase on the nearby shelf. "Stay down, eh?" he commanded, his voice no longer gentle but hard and focused. As they crawled toward the kitchen and away from the windows, Madeline felt a cold realization wash over her. Her past had not only caught up with her, it was now threatening Kevin as well. Outside, in the darkness beyond the shattered window, a figure in black lowered a rifle and spoke into a phone. "Message delivered. She knows we've found her." On the other end of the line, James Whittaker smiled coldly. "Good. Now, let's see what Costner does when he realizes who he's really dealing with." And from her penthouse in Los Angeles, Scarlett Whitmore watched it all unfold through the live updates from her private investigator. She hadn't anticipated violence, hadn't wanted things to go this far. But now that they had, she found herself wondering if she had inadvertently set in motion events that would destroy not only the woman she saw as a rival, but also the man she had never stopped loving. The shattered glass glistened like diamonds on the hardwood floor as Kevin pulled Madeline deeper into the house, away from the windows. Their hearts pounded in terrified unison, their breathing harsh in the sudden silence following the gunshots. "Security system," Kevin muttered, reaching a panel hidden behind a painting. His fingers flew across the keypad, and instantly metal shutters began to descend over all the windows and doors. The house transformed into a fortress within seconds. "You have a panic room?" Madeline asked, her voice shaking. "When you've been in Hollywood as long as I have, you learn to prepare for the worst," Kevin replied grimly. He pulled his phone from his pocket. "I'm calling the police." "No." Madeline grabbed his wrist. "Please, no police." Kevin stared at her, incredulous. "Someone just shot at us twice." "If you call the police, there will be reports, media attention. James will use that," Madeline explained, her eyes wild with fear. "He has connections everywhere, judges, politicians, law enforcement. Trust me, involving the authorities will only make things worse." Kevin hesitated, torn between common sense and the desperation in her voice. Finally, he lowered the phone. "Then we need to get out of here. My security team will be alerted by the system, but they're at least 15 minutes away." He led her to the garage where several vehicles were parked. Bypassing the Aston Martin, he headed for an inconspicuous black SUV with tinted windows. "Get in," he instructed, opening the passenger door for her before sliding behind the wheel. "This has upgraded security features, bulletproof glass, reinforced panels." As they pulled out of the garage, Kevin pressed a button on the dashboard. A hidden door in the hillside opened, revealing a narrow private road that wound down the cliff face, away from the main entrance where the shooter likely waited. "Where are we going?" Madeline asked, glancing nervously at the side mirror, half expecting to see headlights pursuing them. Kevin's jaw was set in a hard line. "Somewhere safe. Somewhere James Whittaker won't think to look for us." As they drove in tense silence, Madeline's phone buzzed again. She pulled it out with trembling fingers. "Don't," Kevin said sharply. "They could be tracking your phone." But Madeline had already seen the message. "Running won't save you, Elizabeth. Or your new boyfriend. This is just the beginning." She turned off the phone and removed the battery, then rolled down the window and threw both pieces into the darkness of the Pacific coastline. Kevin glanced at her. Smart. I've been running. For 5 years, she said quietly. You learn a few things. Tell me everything, Kevin said as they merged onto the Pacific Coast Highway. No more secrets, Madeline. If I'm risking my life for you, I need to know why. Madeline closed her eyes, gathering her strength. When she opened them again, her gaze was resolute. It started 8 years ago when I joined the board of Harwood Industries after graduating from Yale. My father was grooming me to eventually take over the company. That's when I met James Whitaker. Son of your father's business partner, Kevin recalled. Yes, he was charming, ambitious, and my father approved wholeheartedly. Our engagement was announced 6 months later. Madeline's voice turned bitter. I thought I was in love. What I didn't realize was that I was just a pawn in a much larger game. What kind of game? Corporate espionage at first. James was using his relationship with me to access sensitive information about Harwood Industries' technology developments. But it went deeper than that. Madeline twisted her hands in her lap. 3 years into our engagement, I discovered financial irregularities in the company books. Hundreds of millions of dollars being funneled through offshore accounts. Kevin whistled low. And you confronted them. I was naive, Madeline admitted. I thought my father might be unaware that James and his father were operating behind his back. But when I showed my father the evidence, he wasn't surprised. He was complicit. She paused, the memory clearly painful. He told me to look the other way, said it was how business was done at that level. When I refused, threatened to go to the SEC, that's when everything changed. James got violent, Kevin prompted, remembering what she'd told him earlier. Not just violent. He tried to have me committed to a private psychiatric facility, claimed I was having delusions, that the stress of our upcoming wedding had triggered a psychotic break. Madeline's voice was hollow with remembered fear. My father backed him up. They had forged medical records, paid off doctors. If not for my mother's older sister warning me, I would have been locked away. Kevin's hands tightened on the steering wheel. So you ran. I had no choice. I emptied a private account my grandmother had left me, one my father didn't know about. I changed my appearance, created a new identity, and disappeared. She looked out at the dark ocean passing beside them. I thought I was safe, until tonight. Kevin was silent for a long moment, processing everything. Finally, he asked, "What were they embezzling the money for? Do you know?" Madeline shook her head. "I never found out, but it must have been something huge, something worth ruining their own daughter's life to protect." As they continued north along the coast, the lights of Los Angeles receded behind them. Neither noticed the black sedan that maintained a discreet distance, its driver reporting their movements to James Whitaker. At her penthouse, Scarlett Whitmore paced back and forth, anxiety coursing through her veins. This was not what she had planned. When she hired the private investigator to dig into Madeline's past, she had expected to find something scandalous, but ordinary, perhaps a criminal record or a secret marriage, something she could leak to the press to embarrass Kevin and drive a wedge between him and his new obsession. She had not expected gunfire. She had not expected attempted murder. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed a name she hadn't seen in years, James Whitaker. "What the hell are you doing?" she demanded without preamble. "Hello to you too, Scarlett," James replied, his voice smooth and controlled. "It's been a while." "Cut the crap, James. You nearly killed Kevin tonight. Collateral damage. I wasn't aiming for him." Scarlett sank onto her white leather sofa, suddenly dizzy. "This wasn't our agreement. I hired you to find information. Shown the woman not to shoot her." James laughed coldly. "You hired my private investigator, Scarlett, not me. And what you don't seem to understand is that Madeline Carter isn't just some random woman. She's Elizabeth Harwood, my fiancée, and she has information that could destroy me, her father, and half the power players in the tech industry." "I don't care about your business problems," Scarlett snapped. "I care about Kevin. If anything happens to him." "Still carrying a torch for your ex, I see," James interrupted. "Don't worry, I'm not interested in hurting Costner. I just want Elizabeth back where she belongs." "And where is that?" "Under control," James replied simply. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a runaway fiancé to reclaim." The line went dead, leaving Scarlett staring at the phone in horror. What had she done? In her jealousy, had she endangered the man she claimed to love? She grabbed her car keys. She needed to warn Kevin to make things right before it was too late. Kevin drove north for nearly 2 hours, finally turning onto a private road that wound through dense woods. The SUV's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating a rustic cabin nestled among towering redwoods. "My hunting cabin," Kevin explained as they pulled up. "Only a handful of people know about it. No staff, no security system linked to outside monitoring. Just peace and quiet." "And isolation," Madeline added softly. Kevin nodded. That too. Inside, the cabin was simple but comfortable, a far cry from Kevin's luxurious homes in Beverly Hills and Malibu. A large stone fireplace dominated the main room, flanked by worn leather furniture. The kitchen was basic but functional, and a narrow staircase led to a loft bedroom. Kevin moved quickly, securing the doors and windows before starting a fire. Madeline stood in the center of the room, hugging herself, suddenly aware of how alone they were. "I've put you in danger," she said, as Kevin returned from the kitchen with 2 glasses of whiskey. "I'm sorry." He handed her one of the glasses. "I'm not." The firelight cast shadows across his face, accentuating the determination in his eyes. Madeline took a sip of whiskey, feeling its warmth spread through her chest. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You barely know me." Kevin considered the question, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Maybe I'm tired of the artifice in my life, the fake smiles, the hollow relationships, the constant performance. When I saw you at that party, watching from the shadows, you were the only real thing in the room." He moved closer, his gaze holding hers. "And maybe, just maybe, I've been waiting my whole life to fight for something that matters." The moment hung between them, charged with possibilities. Then Kevin stepped back, breaking the spell. "You should get some rest," he said. "Take the loft. I'll sleep down here, keep watch." Madeline nodded, grateful for his consideration. As she climbed the stairs to the loft, exhaustion hit her like a physical force. It had been less than 24 hours since the gala, yet her entire world had shifted on its axis. She collapsed onto the bed, not bothering to remove her clothes, and fell into a troubled sleep. Downstairs, Kevin sat by the fire, his mind racing. He needed a plan, a way to protect Madeline and deal with the threat James Whittaker posed. But first, he needed more information. He pulled out a satellite phone, untraceable, designed for remote locations, and dialed a number he rarely used. "Jackson," he said when a gruff voice answered. "It's Costner, I need your help." Mike Jackson was a former FBI agent who had consulted on one of Kevin's films years ago. They had stayed in touch, with Jackson occasionally providing security consultation for high-profile events. If anyone could help navigate this situation, it was him. "What kind of trouble are you in?" Jackson asked after Kevin explained the situation. "The kind that involves powerful people and a lot of money," Kevin replied. "I need to know what Harwood Industries and the Whittaker family are really involved in, and I need protection for Madeline." "This sounds bigger than a personal vendetta, Costner. If what the woman says is true about the embezzlement, we could be looking at corporate conspiracy at the highest levels. Can you help us or not?" Jackson sighed. "I'll see what I can dig up. In the meantime, stay off the grid. Don't. Use your credit cards, don't contact anyone else. I'll call you back on this number in 24 hours. After ending the call, Kevin added more wood to the fire and settled deeper into the couch, his eyes fixed on the doorway, his hand never far from the hunting rifle mounted above the fireplace. Upstairs, Madeline dreamed of dancing on a balcony, of shattered glass and falling stars, of her father's cold eyes as he signed the papers that would have committed her to an asylum. She woke with a start, heart racing to find early morning light filtering through the cabin windows. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back. The gunshots, the escape, Kevin bringing her to this hidden sanctuary. She made her way downstairs to find Kevin in the kitchen cooking breakfast. The normalcy of the scene, this movie star making pancakes in a rustic cabin while on the run from dangerous enemies, struck her as absurdly comical. A laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep inside her, surprising them both. Kevin raised an eyebrow. Care to share the joke? Just this, Madeline gestured around them. A week ago, I was serving canapes at Hollywood parties. Now I'm in hiding with Kevin Costner while my psychotic ex-fiancé tries to kill us. It's like a bad movie plot. Kevin's mouth quirked. If it were a movie, I'd probably turn it down. Too unbelievable. They shared a brief smile, a moment of connection amid the chaos. Then Kevin's satellite phone rang, shattering the illusion of peace. Jackson, he answered, putting the call on speaker. What did you find? Nothing good. Jackson's voice crackled through the small device. Harwood Industries isn't just a tech company, Costner. According to my sources, they've been developing advanced surveillance technology for private military contractors and certain government agencies, the kind that operate in the shadows. Madeline paled. What kind of surveillance technology? AI-driven facial recognition systems capable of identifying and tracking individuals across multiple platforms, security cameras, social media, satellite imagery. Supposedly it's for counter-terrorism, but in the wrong hands. It could be used to create a surveillance state, Madeline finished, her voice hollow. That explains the embezzlement. They needed untraceable funds to develop technology that would never be approved through official channels. There's more, Jackson continued. 3 weeks ago, a whistleblower from Harwood Industries was found dead in his apartment. Official cause suicide, but there were inconsistencies in the police report. Kevin and Madeline exchanged alarmed glances. And here's the kicker. James Whitaker isn't just looking for you, Ms. Harwood. According to my contact, he's in Los Angeles right now, and he's not alone. Who's with him? Kevin demanded. There was a pause before Jackson answered. Scarlett Whitmore. They were spotted together at the Chateau Marmont last night, having what appeared to be a heated discussion. Kevin's expression hardened. Scarlett's involved in this. I can't say for certain, but it doesn't look good. I'd advise you to... The call cut off abruptly. Kevin tried redialing, but there was no signal. The storm, he said, nodding toward the window where rain had begun to lash against the glass. It sometimes interferes with the satellite connection up here. But Madeline wasn't listening. She was staring out the window, her face drained of color. Kevin, she whispered. There's someone outside. He moved swiftly to her side, peering through the rain-streaked glass. At first, he saw nothing but the swaying trees and the muddy driveway where his SUV was parked. Then a movement caught his eye, a figure in black, moving stealthily toward the cabin from the cover of the forest. Get away from the windows, Kevin ordered, pulling Madeline toward the center of the room. He reached for the hunting rifle above the fireplace, checking that it was loaded. How did they find us? Madeline asked, panic rising in her voice. Kevin's expression was grim. The SUV must have a tracker I didn't know about, or what? Or Scarlett knows about this place. She's been here before, years ago. His jaw tightened. If she's working with James... The sound of breaking glass from the back of the cabin interrupted him. Someone was forcing their way in. The cellar, Kevin whispered urgently, leading Madeline to a small door hidden beneath a rug in the corner of the room. There's a tunnel. That leads to an old hunting blind about a quarter-mile from here. Take the rifle. I'll hold them off, buy you time. Madeline shook her head fiercely. I'm not leaving you. This isn't a debate, Kevin insisted, pressing the rifle into her hands. Go, stay hidden. I'll find you when it's safe. Before she could protest further, the front door burst open, and 2 men in tactical gear rushed in, weapons drawn. Behind them, framed in the doorway, stood James Whitaker, tall, blonde, and coldly handsome, in an expensive suit that seemed oddly out of place in the rustic setting. Kevin Costner, James said, his voice cultured and smooth. I must say I'm a fan of your work. The bodyguard was particularly relevant, given the current situation. Kevin stepped forward, positioning himself between James and the hidden cellar door where Madeline was now concealed. James Whitaker, he replied coolly, you're trespassing on private property. James smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. Am I? Or am I simply retrieving stolen property? My fiancée seems to have wandered off with some rather sensitive information. She's not your fiancée, Kevin countered, and people aren't property. Semantics, James waved a dismissive hand. The fact remains, Elizabeth belongs with me. Her father is quite concerned about her mental health. We only want what's best for her. Like locking her in an asylum, Kevin challenged, or shooting at her through my window. Something dangerous flashed in James's eyes. I see she's been telling tales. Elizabeth always did have a vivid imagination. One of the symptoms of her condition, I'm afraid. He stepped further into the cabin, his armed guards flanking him. Where is she, Costner? This doesn't have to get messy. Kevin stood his ground. She's not here. I brought her to the authorities. By now she's telling them everything about your embezzlement scheme and your illegal surveillance technology. For the first time, uncertainty crossed James's face. You're bluffing. Am I? Kevin locked eyes with him. Why take the chance? The FBI has enough to start an investigation. How long before they freeze your assets, seize your records? James's composure slipped, revealing the rage beneath. Search the cabin, he ordered his men. Find her. As the guards moved to obey, a new voice spoke from the doorway. That's enough, James. All heads turned to see Scarlett Whitmore standing in the entrance, rain dripping from her designer coat, a small revolver held steadily in her manicured hand. Scarlett. Kevin's voice was thick with disbelief. What are you doing? Fixing. My mistake, she replied, her eyes never leaving James. I wanted to break you two up, Kevin. I was jealous. So I hired an investigator to dig up dirt on your new girlfriend. I didn't know who she really was. I didn't know what I was getting into. James's laugh was cold. And now you think you can save the day, play the hero? That's not how this works, Scarlett. I called the FBI, Scarlett said flatly. Told them everything. About the embezzlement, the illegal surveillance tech, the whistleblower's death. They're on their way. You're lying, James snarled, but there was fear in his eyes now. Am I? Scarlett echoed Kevin's earlier challenge. Why take the chance? For a tense moment, no one moved. Then James made a decision. We're leaving, he ordered his men. Now. As they backed toward the door, James fixed Kevin with a cold stare. This isn't over, Costner. Not by a long shot. They disappeared into the rain, the sound of their vehicle's engine fading into the distance. Only when they were gone did Scarlett lower her weapon, her hand trembling visibly. Is she safe? She asked, her voice small and uncertain. Kevin nodded toward the cellar door. You can come out now, Madeline. The hidden door creaked open, and Madeline emerged, still clutching the rifle. Her eyes widened when she saw Scarlett. You called the FBI, really? Kevin asked Scarlett. Scarlett couldn't meet his gaze. No, that was a bluff, but I should have. I will now. Madeline approached her cautiously. Why did you help us? You've been trying to expose me for days. Because I realized there's a difference between jealousy and whatever this is. Scarlett gestured vaguely at the chaos around them. I never wanted anyone to get hurt, especially not Kevin. The three of them stood in silence, the only sound the rain beating against the cabin roof. The momentary reprieve felt fragile, temporary. James Whittaker would return with more men better prepared, and next time a bluff wouldn't save them. We need to go, Kevin said finally. James will realize Scarlett was lying about the FBI. We need to make it true before he comes back. Madeline nodded, then turned to Scarlett with newfound determination. Will you help us? Really help us this time? Scarlett looked between them, at the trust growing between Kevin and this woman who had captured his heart. She felt a pang of regret for her actions, but also a resolve to make things right. Yes, she said simply. I'll help you. But as they prepared to leave the cabin, none of them noticed the small drone hovering just outside the window, its camera, recording everything, transmitting directly to Richard Harwood's private office in Connecticut, where Elizabeth's father watched with cold calculation, already planning his next move. Dawn broke over the Pacific Coast Highway as Kevin's SUV sped south toward Los Angeles. Inside, an uneasy alliance had formed between three unlikely companions: Kevin Costner, Hollywood icon, Madeline Carter, formerly Elizabeth Harwood, heiress on the run, and Scarlett Whitmore, producer and Kevin's jealous ex, whose actions had inadvertently set catastrophic events in motion. "My contact at the FBI is meeting us at 9 a.m., Kevin said, glancing at Madeline in the rearview mirror. She sat in the back seat, her face pale but resolute. "Mike Daniels, former military intelligence, now Bureau. We can trust him." "Can we?" Madeline asked quietly. "James has connections everywhere." "Mike's different," Kevin insisted. "He consulted on criminal intent back in 2013. Straight arrow, incorruptible." Scarlett, riding shotgun, turned to face Madeline. "I'm sorry," she said for perhaps the 5th time since they'd left the cabin. "I had no idea what I was getting into when I hired that investigator." Madeline's response was cool but not unkind. "Jealousy makes people do terrible things, Scarlett, but at least you tried to make it right in the end." The sun climbed higher. As they approached the city limits, Kevin took a series of seemingly random turns, checking the rearview mirror frequently. "Taking precautions?" Scarlett asked. Kevin nodded grimly. "James won't give up easily." "Neither will your father," he added, glancing again at Madeline. "He never does," she replied, her voice hollow. "When I was 12, I wanted to attend regular school instead of continuing with private tutors. He refused. I ran away to my aunt's house. He had her entire street blockaded by private security until I agreed to come home." "Sounds like a real charmer," Scarlett murmured. "He believes control is love," Madeline said. "The Harwood dynasty has operated that way for generations." They arrived at a nondescript office building in Culver City. Kevin parked in an underground garage, and they took a service elevator to the 5th floor. A fit, gray-haired man in a crisp suit waited for them in a conference room with no windows. "Mike," Kevin greeted him with a handshake. "Thanks for meeting us on short notice." Mike Daniels nodded curtly. "You said it was a matter of national security. That gets my attention." His sharp eyes scanned the three of them, lingering longest on Madeline. "Ms. Harwood, I presume?" Madeline stiffened. "How did you—" "I did my homework after Kevin called," Mike replied. "Your disappearance 5 years ago caused quite a stir in certain circles, though most of the public never heard about it." "My father's influence," she said bitterly. "He made sure the story never made the news." Over the next hour, Madeline laid out everything. The embezzlement she had discovered, the surveillance technology Harwood Industries was developing illegally, her father and James's attempt to have her committed, and her years on the run. Mike took meticulous notes, his expression growing grimmer by the minute. When she finished, he closed his notebook and stared at her intently. "You understand what you're doing?" he asked. "Going against Richard Harwood and James Whitaker will put you in the crosshairs of some very powerful people." "I've been in their crosshairs for 5 years," Madeline replied. "I'm tired of running." Mike turned to Kevin. "And you understand what this could do to your career. The Hollywood elite won't take kindly to one of their own getting involved in corporate espionage and government corruption." Kevin's jaw tightened. "Some things matter more than a career, Mike." "And you?" Mike asked Scarlett, clearly the most surprising addition to this unlikely team. Scarlett straightened her designer blouse, a hint of her usual confidence returning. "I've produced films that exposed government corruption. Might as well do it in real life." Mike allowed himself a small smile. "All right then, here's what we're going to do." 3 hours later, they left the office with a plan. Mike would assemble a small trusted team to build a case against Harwood Industries and the Whitakers. Madeline would provide testimony and help locate the financial records she had glimpsed years ago. Kevin would use his connections to secure a safe house where they could work without fear of surveillance. As they drove to Kevin's Malibu home to gather supplies before heading to the safe house, Scarlett's phone rang. She checked the caller ID and frowned. "It's James," she said, showing the screen to the others. "Answer it," Mike had instructed earlier. "Act natural. We need him to think he still has the upper hand." Scarlett put the call on speaker. "James," she greeted, her voice carefully neutral. "Scarlett, darling." His voice was smooth as silk, betraying no hint of their confrontation at the cabin. "I think we got off on the wrong foot earlier." "You could say that," she replied dryly. "Bringing armed men to threaten my friends tends to sour relationships." James chuckled. A regrettable miscalculation on my part. I was overzealous in my concern for Elizabeth's well-being. Kevin and Madeline exchanged glances in the rearview mirror. The casual dismissal of violence was chilling. "What do you want, James?" Scarlett asked, getting to the point. "To propose a truce. A meeting, just the four of us. You, Kevin, Elizabeth, and myself. No security, no weapons, just civilized people having a civilized conversation. Why would we agree to that after what happened at the cabin?" Scarlett challenged. "Because I'm prepared to offer Elizabeth what she's always wanted. Freedom. Legal documents absolving her of any corporate obligations or ties to Harwood Industries. A clean slate." Madeline leaned forward, her face tense. It sounded too good to be true because it was. "And what would you want in return?" Scarlett asked, following their agreed strategy. "Nothing dramatic. Just the return of certain files Elizabeth took with her when she left. Insurance policies, you might call them, and her signature on a confidentiality agreement. Standard corporate procedure." "I'll discuss it with them and call you back," Scarlett said, trying to sound non-committal. "Don't take too long, darling. My offer expires at midnight." The line went dead. "He's lying," Madeline said immediately. "I never took any files. There's something else he wants." "It's a trap," Kevin agreed, pulling into the private driveway of his beach house. "But it also means he's desperate. He wouldn't offer a meeting unless he's feeling cornered." They parked and entered the house through the garage, careful to remain out of sight from the road or beach. As Kevin led them through the kitchen toward his office, where he kept his passport and emergency cash, Madeline suddenly froze. "Stop!" she whispered, grabbing Kevin's arm. "Something's wrong." Kevin scanned the room, seeing nothing out of place. "What is it?" "The air. It smells like—" Her eyes widened in recognition. "My father's cologne. Clive Christian No. 1, $865 an ounce. He's been here." As if on cue, a voice spoke from the darkened living room. "Always had an excellent sense of smell, Elizabeth, even as a child." "Richard." Harwood stepped into the light, tall, imperious, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit despite the early hour. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his steel blue eyes, so like his daughter's, cold and assessing. "Father," Madeline whispered, unconsciously taking a step back. "It's been 5 years, 2 months, and 14 days, Richard said calmly. "You've led us on quite a chase." Kevin moved protectively closer to Madeline. "How did you get in here?" Richard smiled thinly. "Mr. Costner, when you've built a technological empire worth billions, few doors remain closed to you." He turned his attention back to his daughter. "Elizabeth, it's time to come home. This little adventure has gone on long enough." "Adventure?" Madeline's voice rose in disbelief. "You tried to have me committed to an asylum. You helped James fake medical records." "For your own protection," Richard replied, unmoved. "Your accusations against James and the company were becoming dangerous to yourself and to our family legacy." "They weren't accusations. They were facts. You were embezzling company funds to develop illegal surveillance technology." Richard waved a dismissive hand. "Technology that would have transformed national security. Do you have any idea what we could have accomplished if you hadn't interfered, the contracts we could have secured? Contracts for technology that violates every privacy law in the country," Madeline shot back. "Laws change, progress demands sacrifice." Richard's eyes hardened. "You've always been too idealistic, Elizabeth, just like your mother." At the mention of her mother, Madeline flinched. "Leave her out of this." "Elizabeth Harwood was never cut out for our world either," Richard continued relentlessly, always questioning, always challenging. "It made her unstable." "She wasn't unstable." Madeline's voice cracked with emotion. "She was the only one who saw the truth about you, about the company, and you destroyed her for it." Kevin placed a steadying hand on Madeline's shoulder, while Scarlett watched the family drama unfold with growing unease. Richard checked his watch, a timepiece worth more than most people's homes. "We're wasting valuable time. James is waiting at the airport. The company jet is fueled and ready to take us back to Connecticut, where we can resolve this situation privately, as a family." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Madeline stated firmly. Richard's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. I wasn't asking, Elizabeth. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small device that looked like a remote control. I had hoped you would be reasonable, but I came prepared for resistance. He pressed a button, and immediately Kevin doubled over in pain, clutching his chest. "Kevin!" Madeline cried, catching him as he staggered. "What did you do to him?" Scarlett demanded, rushing to Kevin's side. "Nothing permanent," Richard assured them coolly. "The device creates localized electrical interference that temporarily disrupts cardiac rhythm. Quite painful, but the effects subside quickly if I release the button." His finger hovered over the control. "Which I will do as soon as Elizabeth agrees to come with me." Madeline looked from her father to Kevin, who was now on his knees, his face contorted in agony. "Stop it, you're killing him." "That depends entirely on you, my dear." "I'll go with you," she conceded, tears streaming down her face. "Just stop hurting him." Richard released the button, and Kevin collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath. Scarlett cradled his head, watching helplessly as Madeline walked toward her father. "A wise decision," Richard said, placing a possessive hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Now, let's—" His words were cut short by the sudden crash of the front door being broken down. Armed FBI agents poured into the house, weapons drawn. "Richard Harwood," Mike Daniels announced, stepping forward with his badge raised. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, corporate fraud, illegal weapons development, and assault. Hands where I can see them." Richard's face contorted with rage. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. One phone call and your career is over." "I don't think so," said a new voice. James Whitaker was led into the room in handcuffs, flanked by 2 agents. "Sorry, Richard, I've already cut a deal. In exchange for leniency, I've turned over everything. The financial records, the prototype specs, the communication logs, all of it." Richard stared at his would-be son-in-law in disbelief. "You treacherous bastard." "It was always business, never personal," James replied with a shrug. "You taught me that." As Richard Harwood was handcuffed and read his rights, Madeline knelt beside Kevin, who was slowly recovering. "Are you okay?" she asked, stroking his face. "I've had better days," he managed, his voice raspy. "But I've definitely had worse." "How did they know to come here?" Scarlett asked, confusion evident on her face. Mike approached them, holstering his weapon. "We've been monitoring Harwood for months. When Kevin called me this morning, I recognized the connection immediately. We've been building a case, but we needed someone on the inside." He nodded respectfully to Madeline. "Your testimony will be crucial." As the agents led Richard and James away, Madeline watched her father go with a complex mixture of emotions, relief, sadness, and finally a sense of closure. "It's really over," she whispered. "Not quite," Kevin said, struggling to his feet with her help. "There's still the matter of your future." "What future?" Madeline asked. "Even with them gone, I'm still Elizabeth Harwood. That name comes with too much baggage." "Then don't be Elizabeth Harwood," Kevin suggested. "Be Madeline Carter. Be whoever you want to be." She looked at him, hope dawning in her eyes for the first time in years. "Is that even possible?" "With the right help, anything's possible," Mike interjected. "We can arrange for protective custody during the trial, and afterward, well, witness protection has helped people start over before." Scarlett, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly spoke up. "Or you could stay." When they all looked at her in surprise, she continued, "Hollywood loves a good redemption story, and I happen to know a talented producer who's looking for her next big project." Kevin raised an eyebrow. Scarlett Whitmore offering to help someone else's career. The world really has turned upside down. Scarlett shrugged elegantly. "What can I say? Near-death experiences have a way of changing one's perspective." She met Madeline's gaze directly. "Besides, talent recognizes talent. You've survived in a world designed to break you. That takes a kind of strength Hollywood desperately needs." 3 months later, at the premiere of Kevin's latest film, flashes from cameras illuminated the red carpet as he stepped out of a limousine. The crowd's excitement reached a fever pitch when he turned to offer his hand to his companion for the evening. Madeline emerged, radiant in a designer gown, her blonde hair styled in elegant waves. No longer hiding in the shadows, she walked the carpet with confidence, her hand firmly in Kevin's. "Are you nervous?" he whispered as they posed for photographs. Terrified, she admitted, but in a good way. At the after-party, industry insiders clamored to meet the mysterious woman who had captured Kevin Costner's heart and who, rumors suggested, had a fascinating story of her own to tell. Scarlett worked the room like the consummate professional she was, introducing Madeline to key players as a promising new talent with a unique voice. As the evening wound down, Kevin led Madeline to a quiet balcony overlooking the city, reminiscent of where they had first danced at his mansion, which now seemed a lifetime ago. Full circle, Madeline remarked, gazing at the twinkling lights of Los Angeles. Not quite, Kevin said, taking her hands in his. This is just the beginning. In the courtroom across town, the evidence against Richard Harwood and James Whittaker mounted daily. The trial had become a sensation, exposing corruption at the highest levels of corporate America. With each revelation, Elizabeth Harwood's reputation was vindicated, while Madeline Carter's future grew brighter. Do you ever miss her? Kevin asked softly. Elizabeth, I mean. Madeline considered the question, watching the city lights shimmer like stars brought down to earth. Sometimes, she admitted. She was born into privilege, into power. But she never had what Madeline has found. And what's that? She turned to face him, her blue eyes clear and certain. Freedom. Truth. She smiled, touching his cheek gently. Love. As their lips met, the last pieces of Elizabeth Harwood fell away, leaving only Madeline Carter, no longer running, no longer hiding, but moving forward into a future bright with possibilities. In the distance, a shooting star streaked across the Hollywood sky, as if the universe itself was celebrating their hard-won happiness. It wouldn't be easy, nothing worth having ever is, but together they had faced down the past and emerged victorious. And in Hollywood, as in life, that was the most satisfying ending of all.